Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Dylan Atlas Baker. I'm one of the co-founders here at Spectacles, and we're really excited to talk to you today. We've got a topic today that has been top of mind for us, and I know has been a topic of conversation for lots of people in the Looker community, which is the addition of LookML models in Looker Studio, or what was formerly known as Google Data Studio, which got rebranded to Looker Studio last year. And so really excited to have Josh talk us through what that integration looks like, why you might want to use it, and kind of really get hands-on in the demo and show us kind of practically how quickly you can get this integration set up. Before I hand over to him, I've just got a couple points of order. One is, if this is the first time you're joining us, we do these webinars every 2 weeks. They are for the Looker community. They're really not about Spectacles as a tool. They're really just to bring the Looker community together and talk about things of interest to all of us. And so sometimes they're presented by Josh or I, sometimes they're presented by some of our consulting partners, customers, other Looker users. We've got one in 2 weeks, which is actually by a Looker user in the community. We've got some of the members of the team from Assurance talking about how they have built up a hub and spoke Looker architecture over time as they've scaled the various use cases for Looker in their organization. I think kind of managing nicely sized and testable projects is key to really getting the most out of Looker, and the hub and spoke architecture can leverage that as long as you do that well. And so Mitch and the team there are going to walk us through that. You can sign up for all of our webinars at spectacles.dev/webinars. And then one more thing, which is just some news from this week from us. You may well have already received an email about this, but we've launched a Looker jobs board. The idea here is to provide companies a way to advertise roles that involve Looker, companies that use Looker, to people who probably already use Looker or want to use it in their next role. And so the idea from a candidate point of view, if you're ever looking for your next role, is you can find other companies where you can keep using Looker in your next role. And particularly from the hiring point of view, if you're a company that is trying to hire people into your data team and you really want people who can hit the ground running because they already have a lot of experience with Looker, the jobs board's for you. So you can see it there at spectacles.dev/lookerjobs. And there's a link right there if you want to submit a role to do that as well. And if you have any questions, it's lookerjobs@spectacles.dev. Happy to answer any questions you might have before you want to submit your first role or anything like that. Perfect. So one final thing, just before I hand off to Josh, is that we have a Slack community where we manage the conversations and discussions and Q&A around these webinars. I am just dropping the sign-up link in the Slack sign-up link in the Zoom chat. So we'd love to have you join us there. There's a channel called Webinar, LookML, and Looker Studio where we're going to have the conversation for today. If you haven't already, let us know where you're calling from. And as you have questions through the webinar today, drop them in there, and Josh and I will try our best to answer them towards the end of the session today. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Josh, and you'll be in his very capable hands. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, Dylan. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Temple. I'm one of the co-founders here at Spectacles. We've got an interesting session here and a lot to cover, so I'm going to breeze through some of these slides, but just a quick hit on who I am. I've got about 6 years of experience developing in and on Looker. I was on a solo data team where we built out a data stack from scratch at Milk Bar, and then I was the 4th analytics engineer at Spotify. So I've seen big and small. I've also done a lot of work in the Looker open source community, created a popular Python parsing package. Well, it's hard to say, called LKML, which you may be familiar with. It's great for programmatically editing, generating, modifying LookML. And then now Spectacles. So we're going to be talking about Looker Studio today, which of course was formerly known as Google Data Studio, has now been brought into the fold of the Looker suite of products. The idea today is to talk about Looker Studio from the perspective of, I'm a person who knows Looker, but I don't know Looker Studio. Why would I need it? How might I integrate it into our team? And what are what's the use case around connecting it to Looker? So I'm going to assume that you know a good amount about Looker, but not very much about Looker Studio. So we'll talk about why you would even really care about Looker Studio when you already have this very expensive and very feature complete analytics platform that is Looker. We're going to talk about the requirements and a few gotchas to get set up. I'll do a crash course on like what's the terminology in Looker Studio, how does it map to the terminology in Looker. We'll talk about data sources, and then we'll end with a quick demo just to show off a use case that might be interesting to you if your company's already using Looker. Cool. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. I want to just start by showing you a couple of screenshots of Looker Studio dashboards from Google's own gallery. The link to this is in the bottom right of the slide. This is a cool visualization of the regions that Anthony Bourdain traveled to on his different shows in the different seasons. And you can already see this looks a lot more like something you'd get out of Tableau than something that you'd get out of Looker. Looker, very great for modeling and governance, not so great for making pretty charts. And Looker Studio does fill this gap a bit better. You can see there's like kind of a color theme. There's these text boxes. We're not just seeing charts kind of like tiled on a page. We're seeing something that looks a little bit more like a report. Here's another cool one where it's showing country investment in R&D, and they've got this nice like jittered bubble chart here with vertical axes. There's different colors. There's like this nice tooltip. So hopefully you're getting a sense already of like what Looker Studio can do that Looker on its own really can't. So let's talk about some of the other reasons why. First of all, it's really easy, maybe even a little too easy, which we'll get into in a second, to mash up data from different sources. So in Looker, we need that data to be in our data warehouse. We need it to be modeled in LookML, and only when that's done can people play around with it. Looker Studio flips that on its head a little bit because they have all of these built-in connectors where you can just turn it on and start to pull data in. No ETL pipeline, you don't need to have it in your data warehouse. You can just import the data. There's 23 different connectors that are maintained by Google itself, and these are the ones here. These tend to be like GCP related stuff, but also things like Google Ads, Google Sheets, incredibly useful, Google Analytics, incredibly useful, and then of course BigQuery. But there's 773 connectors that are maintained by partners. And so these are things like MailChimp, Shopify, Facebook ads, Twitter ads. I can't vouch for the quality of all of these or the support of all of these, but like there's this idea that you can get data from lots of different places. And when you combine that with a feature in Google, in Looker Studio called Blend, you can basically in the browser join this data together and produce charts and tables off of that. So you can already get an idea that like it's easy to just mix and match data. Yes, you lose some of the governance that you get in Looker, but what you gain is flexibility and speed, which can be really useful for more ad hoc data analyst personas that maybe need a quick answer, a directional answer, and don't need to wait for the data engineering team to build out things correctly in Looker. The other thing that's cool about Looker Studio is just this like Google Docs style of visual customization. So Looker Studio was a Google product, and it really feels like a Google product. You'll notice that just in the design language, but here are some UI elements from Looker Studio. You can see there's text boxes and shapes and lines and themes, and even the maps can be styled with this Google Maps JSON. So there's all of these ways that you can format and style your reports in Looker Studio that allow a depth of visual customization that doesn't otherwise really exist in Looker. Another cool feature that I don't think is even really used all that much is you can embed these Looker Studio dashboards interactively. Like if you want to embed Looker, you're paying for, powered by Looker embed subscription. It's a big effort to get Looker embedded, but Looker Studio is free. It can be embedded just out of the box. You can put it on web pages. You can put them in even in Google Slides. There's a native integration there. So you can already think of ways that you can create these very visually appealing reports and embed them in interesting places without some of the overhead that you would need to do that in Looker. And then just a quick hit on what Looker Studio Pro is. So you might have heard this term as well. It's starting to sound like iPhone types of like word salad, Pro, Max, etc. But Looker Studio Pro is like the paid version of Looker Studio. It adds a few nice bells and whistles for enterprises. Particularly the one I like is the one in the middle, which is assets are owned by your GCP project and your GCP organization. They're not owned by individual users. So if someone leaves the company, that stuff sticks around. It can be, owned by the org and not by people. They also have, team workspaces, which is more of a content organization approach and different delivery schedules. I won't get into all that. Just know that, it has more enterprise related features. That's what you're paying for. Okay. So hopefully you're sold now. You're like excited about this. You want to try it out. So how do you actually connect it to Looker? Like I said, Looker is just one of the many data sources or connectors that you can use in Looker Studio. You don't have to connect Looker. You can do a lot with it just using all of those other connectors. But if you want to sit it on top of Looker, here's what you'll need. First of all, don't start in Looker Studio. Don't make the mistake that I made. Start in Looker because you need to turn on a feature called BI connectors in the Looker admin settings. If you do not do this, you will get confusing error messages when you try to set it up at Looker Studio. So if you take away one thing from this webinar, start in the BI connectors section in Looker admin first. Then this is probably kind of obvious, but if you want to connect, you have to have the Explore permissions for at least one model. And by that, I mean, if you want to add the connection to Looker Studio. This is not required to view data, but if you want to set up the connection between Looker and Looker Studio, you need to have that Explore permission. This one may be less obvious. So if you want to share a Looker Studio report with a coworker, and that coworker does not have a Looker account, they will not be able to see anything in that report that relies on data pulled from Looker. So Looker's own permissioning model applies to Looker Studio reports that use Looker. You need to actually have a Looker account with the ability to access data and the clear cache refresh permissions in order to interact with kind of Looker powered stuff in your Looker Studio reports. So make sure you have a Looker account set up for people who would want to do that. And then there's a few things on the instance side of things. If you're on self-hosted Looker, sorry, this is not available to you. If you're on GCP hosted Looker, 22.16 or higher version. If you're on regular Looker hosted or like old Looker hosted, 23.4 or higher. And then lastly, if you use an IP allow list, you will need to actually allow the IP addresses from Looker Studio to access your Looker instance. And the directive there is just to contact support and get that set up. There are a few limitations. So if you have connected a Looker data source in your Looker Studio report, you can't use something called calculated fields. These are like essentially the table calculation equivalent in Looker Studio. You can't schedule email deliveries or download reports. Seems like a pretty big limitation to me. I don't know if this is a limitation now or a limitation forever. I would imagine the Looker team would be interested in enabling this because this is kind of an annoying limitation. And then some other things that aren't really that big of a deal, but just to keep an eye out for, you have stuff like SQL always where or conditionally filtered, things like that in your LookML. That will still be applied when you pull that data into Looker Studio, but it may not be obvious. So you may want to just have something in the report that indicates what filters have already been pre-applied before that data arrived in Looker Studio. Okay, so let's do a quick crash course on Looker Studio and how it works. So this is the Looker Studio interface. You've got your, very googly looking kind of title up here and menu bar. You can add data, you can add charts, you can add controls, which are like filters that you have in a dashboard. And here's a very bad report that I slapped together, but you can see different visualization types and you can drag and drop them around the page. On the right, you can see the data that's used to power them. And here we actually have imported an Explore from Looker. So you can see each of these bold subheadings is an Explore. And then underneath that are dimensions and measures. They're called metrics in Google Looker Studio, but it's the same concept, right? And then you can pull those fields into your setup for the chart. So here I've got a pie chart on category and count of order items. And so, you can easily see how you drag and drop these fields in, you change the charts, and it's really pretty self-explanatory. In terms of terminology, in Looker Studio, it's called a report. In Looker, it's called a dashboard, but it's the same idea. In Looker Studio, it's called a component. In Looker, it's called a tile, but it's something that lives on a component. Can also be filters and controls and stuff like that, but something that lives on your report. And then there's this idea of connectors, which are places where data can come from. Sort of like a connection, but it's not just databases, it's lots of different places. A data source is like an instance of a connector, and we'll talk about those more in a second, but this is like when we're thinking about what comes from Looker, it would be an explorer or a model. And then fields are just dimensions and measures. We call them fields in Looker too, so hopefully that should be pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so data sources is like the bread and butter of how you get information into Looker Studio, and this is how we're also going to get information from Looker. Here is what it looks like when we bring in a data source from the Looker connector. So you can see here, I've brought in a orders explorer. It's got 53 dimensions. It's automatically inferring type and aggregation for the measures. It also pulls in the descriptions, which is cool, from your LookML. This is not particularly, this doesn't look accurate. Oh yeah, these are dimension groups. So it's applied the description to all of them. But yeah, that's also really nice, is when you have all that description metadata in your LookML, it just gets pulled right into Looker Studio. And there's a few things to note about data sources in Looker Studio. So you have this idea of embedded versus reusable. An embedded data source is created on the fly in a report. It lives in that report, and it has the same permissions or the same kind of sharing as the way that the report has been shared. So it's very good for ad hoc. I'm just adding data into my report, and then I want to share that report with you. You now have access to all that data too, and you don't have to worry about getting access to the data independently. There's also reusable. Reusable is cool because I can set them up for my whole kind of team, and people don't have to set them up every time. They can just go and grab them. But the challenge there is they have to be shared individually. So if I want to share a report with you and the report is built on a reusable data source, I have to share both with you. So it's just one extra step. There's also this idea of data freshness. This is the same concept of like the cache in Looker, but basically on some interval, Looker Studio will invalidate all cached queries. And if those queries come through, they will pass the cache. They'll go directly to the database and refresh the data. You can do it manually, but you can also set an interval for how frequently that cache should be cleared. And it's anywhere between 15 minutes and 12 hours. And then something cool that we're going to look at in the demo that Looker doesn't really have, kind of have it with merge results, is this idea of blends. So blends allow you to take data from different sources like Google Analytics, Google Sheets, and Looker, and I can actually just join them on the fly in the browser. I can define a join key, I can define a join relationship, and just slap all that data together into one big table. And then I can do whatever kinds of aggregations on that. As you can imagine, like some of you are going, oh no, don't allow users to join data without me like doing it correctly for them. And what about symmetric aggregates? There are going to be pitfalls of this approach. For people who know what they're doing, it's actually great to be able to just not have to go and like define everything in LookML and set up the joins, and you can just try it out first. One only thing to caveat here is blended data sources are by nature embedded. They can't be reusable. So it's kind of tied to a specific report. And then I just want to throw this piece of information out here for a lot of you admins. Looker's made modifications to the System Activity History Explorer so that you can see queries that came from Looker Studio, which is nice. If you're just curious, like, are people actually using this? What kind of queries are they running? The performance impact, all that. You can see in the History Explorer, there's a section called Query API Client Properties, and you'll see under the client name, Looker Studio, if you want to filter, and then the ID of the dashboard and the ID of the data source. So nice for doing some monitoring on what's the uptake of this feature. Okay, we're doing okay on time. I'm going to jump into a quick demo. What I'm going to show you is a fictional scenario with some demo data. We're going to imagine that we are an e-commerce company that sells clothing, and we have orders data, and each of those orders has products in it, and the products have a category like pants, shirts, socks, etc. And we're going to assume that we're working on a new way of categorizing these products, which is by maturity stage of the product line. So some of the things we sell are like mature businesses, like we've been selling hoodies and t-shirts forever. Some of them are what we call emerging. Some of them are experimental. And so let me jump over to Google Sheet where we've got that mapping defined. And we're going to talk about how do we take the orders data, which lives in Looker, bring it into Looker Studio, join in the mapping to category stage, and make some visualizations with that. And I've completely delinked everything. So we'll be starting from scratch in terms of setting up the integration, which will hopefully give you, what you need to go and do this on your own instance. So I'm going to switch my share over. Okay, so like I said at the beginning, if you take anything away from this, start in Looker if you want to set up this connection. So I'm in Looker now. I'm in the admin part of Looker under platform BI connectors. And all I have to do is turn this on. So it's not hard, but got to make sure you do it. You could turn off Google Sheets if you don't want to open that can of worms yet. And then I can go into Looker Studio. Here we are in Looker Studio, and we're going to create a blank report. Right at the top here, we see the Looker connector show up. So let's add that. We'll need to enter our Looker instance URL. Click Connect to Looker account. It's going to ask me to link my Looker account to my Google account, just so that everything can play nicely together. So I will agree to that. And now you can see models and explorers all beginning to populate here. So I'm going to grab this demo e-commerce model. I'm going to grab the orders explorer, and I'll click add. And yes, that's okay. Okay, so now you can see over here on the right, I've got my explorer. I've got different views that have been joined in here, dimensions and measures. And, Google has been tried to be so helpful, and they've just pre-populated a little table with something that they thought was worth showing, which is order status and count. Cool. Now, separately from Looker, I have this Google Sheet. And actually, let's just see here. Let's take a look at let's modify this. We will take out I'm going to add just the order count measure here. Count orders. I'm going to take out this order status dimension, and I'm going to add category. So this will just update our table to show, let's get rid of that row number. Okay. So already I've got a nice little chart here with my different product categories and the number of orders corresponding to each one. So this is the data that comes from Looker. Now, let's say I separately have this Google Sheet here. And in this Google Sheet, I have mapped a category stage to each of these categories. And what I want to see is I want to roll up the number of orders and see them broken out by this stage. But this stage doesn't exist in Looker. So if I was just in a Looker world, I'd have to probably put this in a DBT seed or something. I'd have to get it in a table somewhere. Maybe I put it in as, a really ugly case when statement in a derived table or something like that. But really what I want is just to have the data live in this Google Sheet, and I just want to pull it in. So with blends, we can do that. And so first what I need to do is add the Google Sheet as its own data source. So I'm going to go add data. I'm going to click the Google Sheet here. And I've already linked this, so it's already showing my stuff here, but product, stage, category mapping, first row is headers, include hidden and filters. And I can just throw this in here. Now you can see I have two data sources. I've got my Google Sheet with category, stage, and it adds a record count. And I've got my Looker data. So what I want to do now is blend them. So to do that, Up to resource and manage blends. Add a blend. And over here, I've got my sheet. I want to join another table. I'm going to choose my Looker data here. And now I'll configure that join. Oh, first, actually, I need to add the fields that I want to bring into this blend. So we definitely want category. We want product category. We also need stage from the Google Sheet. And then on this side, we're going to need a metric, which is orders. Boom. And now I can configure my join. So I've got my helpful Venn diagrams here. And I'm just going to do an inner join for now. And I can add my condition, which is category on the left, to my Looker products category dimension on the right. And it's really that easy. Now I can just verify I've got everything I need. I've got category, stage, and count of orders. Cool. All right, now I've got a blend, and that blend acts as its own data source here. So you can see here's my blended data with these three things. So let's just take our table here and let's just do a gut check and make sure everything looks right. So I'm going to get rid of my metric. I'm going to add actually first what I have to do is I have to change the data source of this chart because previously it was Looker. Now I'm going to change it to blended data. And now I can see my stage dimension here. So this will allow me to just like visually inspect. Does this look right? Yep, everything's mapping the way it should. So let's try changing the type of chart. Let's do everybody loves to hate on pie charts. Let's do a pie chart. I'm going to change this to stage instead of category, and I will add my orders count of orders. And just like that, we now have a broken out visualization of number of orders by category stage instead of category. And we didn't have to change anything in Looker. We were able to use the really nicely governed orders data that's already been beautifully modeled in Looker with our own kind of ad hoc mapping to produce a chart. And I can go into view and see how that would look for an actual user. And then you need to think about where you could go from here. You could do all kinds of interesting analysis on our different product categories. So I know it's kind of a toy example, but hopefully that's still helpful to get a sense of how blends work and a way that you could use that in Looker Studio that's definitely faster and more powerful than what you could already do in Looker. Cool. That is the end of what I have for you today. So we're going to jump into Q&A now. So I'll invite Dylan back on, bring the slides back up, and we can do some questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Josh. Yeah, we've got a bunch of questions in the Slack channel. And if you want to ask any more, anyone who's on the webinar, please join there. We'll love to read all your questions. A couple ones directly from the content of the talk, Josh. Ron says, at one point you mentioned a 20-dimension limit. Is that you can't have more than 20 dimensions defined, or that you can't use more than 20 of them at a time in a query?
My understanding is it's just for the table visualization. So if you're going to create a table in your report, that report cannot have more than 20 columns that come from dimensions.
Perfect. One from Charlie that says, the partner connections feature looks really interesting, but what advantages are there to having a connector instead of doing the typical data ingestion in our ETL pipeline?
Yeah, I think it's mainly speed. Like really all of the trade-offs between Looker and Looker Studio are going to come down to Looker Studio is faster, but it's kind of the Wild West. And Looker is slower, but it's more accurate and more governed. So, if you're talking about like mission critical data, like in the example I showed, like your orders data, you probably want that to flow through your ETL pipeline, to live in your warehouse where it can be modeled and accessed by things that aren't Looker. But if you just have you just want to throw in some data from another source and just kind of mix and match it and get to an answer quickly, it's going to take a lot longer to do that in the kind of traditional modern data stack flow than it is to just blend it in or add a new data source and model it in one place.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think it's going to be different for different organizations, and obviously, as Josh talked about, there's going to be just trade-offs between like speed and governance and basically everything that we talk about when it comes to kind of Looker versus Looker Studio. But I think there's particularly like an initial exploration stage for me where getting everything into, let's say, DBT and then a view in Looker and then join, like some of that can feel like overkill for like an ad hoc exploration thing. And I may want to figure out if there's kind of anything there. And then maybe I will put it in at that point. Like I'll go through that whole process. But you don't want, I think you want to facilitate, in my opinion, lots of different workflows for different people in your organizations. And there is an exploration one there where I can see an argument the Data Studio provides a better workflow there. And I think you don't want to, I think a critique of Looker has been, oh, it's hard for just like these ad hoc exploration things. And I think this integration, particularly given that you get Looker Studio if you're on Google Workspaces, can be very interesting to lots of organizations. You just need to choose what workflows are right for people in your org. One from Esther that says, for my connection, does my Looker instance need to be hosted on Google Cloud, or was that just an old limitation?
It doesn't need to be hosted on Google Cloud, but it does need to be a Looker hosted instance, if that makes sense. So there are some Looker instances that are not hosted on Google Cloud, but are still hosted by Looker. I think they're actually hosted on AWS, which is kind of funny. But those tended to be the older instances. The newer Looker hosted instances are also hosted on GCP. They have the URL cloud.looker.com. And so it needs to be one or the other of those. Basically, it can't be a self-hosted instance. That's the most important thing.
Scrolling through, ideally you want that data to live in LookML as well, right? Hopefully, I think we probably answered that in the first question. Let's get into a gnarly one. Any idea on how to work around Looker Studio, Google not having a content validator for this stuff? Josh, I'll let you have a stab at that first.
Yeah, so this is a pretty obvious pain point, which is that if you create content in Looker Studio that depends on your models and explorers in Looker, you kind of lose the normal flow of content validation to check that a change that you're making doesn't break a Looker dashboard, or in this case, a Looker Studio dashboard. So to sum up, it's easy to make a change in Looker that would break a Looker Studio dashboard, and you would basically have no way of knowing it. We are like, that's our bread and butter here at Spectacles is testing those kinds of breaking changes and flagging them to developers before they're made. So we are thinking a lot about how we could possibly support this workflow, but the answer right now is it just doesn't exist. There's no way to do it. So you just have that risk of changing LookML and breaking Looker Studio content. Google is aware of the problem. They don't seem to have a they haven't figured out yet how they're going to tackle it. So we're keeping conversations open with them, thinking about how our own product could support this. But right now, that is a risk.
Perfect. Another one from Anthony that says, any idea on how to expose a series of explorers in Looker, but not in Looker Studio? I think my understanding of it is that if you have access to it in Looker and then you go and try to use the Looker connector in Looker Studio, you will have access to all the same things, probably.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah, you would need the user's own explore permissions to be restricted, and that would restrict it in Looker as well. So I will check on that one, but I don't know if there's a way to do it right now.
Perfect. Got a question that says, we have an IP allow list in Looker. Is there a way to identify the IP address of Looker Studio and add it into Looker? Same thing for connected sheets. So is there, like, if you're on an IP allow list, do you need to go and white label something for Looker Studio from whatever IP it's calling from?
Yeah, you do. So the direction from Looker here is to contact support. They don't publish those IPs in their docs, but if you contact support, they should be able to tell you the IP addresses that Looker Studio queries will come from so that you can have it all hooked up correctly.
One more question that says, any idea if Looker will take on more of the visualization elements from Looker Studio?
That would be really great. I wouldn't hold your breath because I think Looker is pretty focused right now on just getting LookML into other places like Looker Studio. So your best bet probably is to just learn how to do it in Looker Studio if you need more complex visualizations. It doesn't seem like that's something they're going to be doing soon, but it would be really nice. I mean, it's pretty customizable in Looker Studio. I've been pleasantly surprised with everything you can do there.
Yeah, I would just echo what Josh says there. I think the Looker modeler announcement and the way the integrations they've already released, I would expect, at least in the short term, that they're hoping to push the use of the LookML models or allow people to use LookML models in multiple different places, and that's probably the greater priority for them right now. Question from Aaron that says, can you explain further the asset management functionality that is available in Looker Studio Pro that you alluded to?
Yeah, sure. So what I was referring to is the assets in Looker Studio, which are generally like reports or data sources. They are in the free version just tied to a specific Google account. So if I create something and I leave the company, those assets no longer work. This is my understanding. I'm also still getting caught up on this, but my understanding is in Looker Studio Pro, you have the ability to associate those assets with the GCP project. So they then are now owned by like the GCP organization that your company belongs to and not a user. So now if I leave, because the assets are not owned by me, they're owned by the org, they still exist and continue to work.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Anthony makes a good point that, yeah, workspace management and user management are also part of Pro, as well as having multiple delivery schedules. It's a minor thing, but if you want content in Looker Studio to be emailed out to different places or delivered in different ways, you will need Pro to do that.
Awesome. Josh, thank you very much. This has been awesome. I think we're probably at the end of the questions there. But as I mentioned at the top, we've got a really great webinar in 2 weeks from the team at Assurance. We're going to be talking about hub and spoke Looker architectures. So definitely don't miss that. We're really, really excited for that. And then we'll be announcing ones for 2 weeks after that and going forward from there shortly. I think you can expect one, as we've done today, but on connected sheets, on how to use LookML in Google Sheets, similarly to how we did here. So that plus others will be going live in the next little bit. As you've signed up for this, you'll receive an email when those go live, but you can always check them out on spectacles.dev/webinars. And kind of as a normal call out, if you're thinking about these problems, you're a kind of mature using data, Looker using organization, and you want to kind of think about improving the developer workflow, reducing bugs in your Looker instance, all that stuff. As Josh talked about earlier, that's our bread and butter. We'd love to talk to you about it. We've built Spectacles really to solve those problems. And so if you're on a webinar like this, you're almost certainly someone who would get value from something like Spectacles. And so even if you're interested in just kind of getting a demo in a very kind of a low commitment way, very happy to chat there, and you can book those on spectacles.dev. That's going to be it from us today. Thank you to all of you for attending today. The community engagement for these, particularly the activity in the Slack channels, is always really fantastic and really makes this kind of feel worthwhile from our point of view. So a big thank you there, and we look forward to seeing you on one of the upcoming webinars. See you soon, everyone.